So you did everything you were supposed to do. You got renter's insurance to protect your stuff, but then, when you actually needed it, you filed a claim and you got a denial letter. Ugh, it is such a frustrating moment, but believe me, it is not the end of the story. Today we're going to break down exactly how you can fight that denial and, hopefully, win. Okay, so you're holding that letter, and this is the big question on your mind. It can feel so final, like a judgment, but I want you to try and reframe that thought right now. A denial isn't a period at the end of a sentence. Think of it more like a comma. It's just the insurance company's opening move. And now, well, now it's your turn to make yours. That's absolutely right. The very first thing you need to do is just take a deep breath. An initial denial from an insurance company is almost never a final verdict. Seriously, think of it as their opening offer in a negotiation. Now it's your turn to respond. To build a really strong appeal, you first have to understand why they said no. So why do these claims get denied in the first place? Let's pull back the curtain on the most common reasons, which, you guessed it, are usually hidden somewhere in that policy's fine print. You know, it might feel personal, but insurance denials are rarely just random. They're following a specific rulebook, and the reasons almost always fall into a few key buckets. The most common ones? A lack of documentation. You just can't prove what you lost. Or the damages from something your policy specifically excludes. It could also be as simple as filing too late, an issue with your original application, or hitting a cap on coverage for certain items. All right, let's zoom in on policy exclusions for a second. This is such a critical concept. Every single policy has a list of things it just won't cover, period. And it's why reading the fine print is so important. We all kind of know about the big ones, right? Like floods or earthquakes, those almost always require a separate policy. But exclusions can also cover less obvious stuff, like, say, damage from a slow, dripping pipe that's been happening for months, or just general wear and tear. Okay, here's another huge trap for renters. It's something called a sublimit. Basically, this is a cap on how much the insurance company will pay for a specific category of your stuff, no matter what your total coverage amount is. This most often applies to things like jewelry, high-end electronics, fancy cameras, or art. Let's look at a real-world example of how this can sting. Let's say a burglar breaks in and steals your $5,000 engagement ring. Your policy might have a standard jewelry sublimit of only $1,500. Now, unless you had that ring specifically listed or scheduled for its full value, the insurance company only has to pay out that $1,500. It's a really painful but very common lesson in the importance of understanding the details. All right, so now you get the why behind the denial. Let's talk about the how. How do you actually fight back? It is time to build your action plan and take control of the situation with a formal appeal. Listen, an angry phone call or a frustrated email isn't going to get you very far. A structured, methodical approach is your best weapon here. As you can see, it all starts with a deep dive. Review that denial letter and your full policy, side by side. Next, you go on a mission to gather evidence, receipts, photos, maybe even expert reports. Then you draft a formal, fact-based appeal letter. If that gets denied, you escalate to a claims supervisor. And your final step, before you even think about calling a lawyer, is to file an official complaint with your state's Department of Insurance. This is probably the single most important piece of advice in this entire process. It is so easy to let your frustration and anger take over, but your appeal letter needs to be a professional, evidence-based argument. Just stick to the facts, reference the specific parts of your policy, present your new documentation, and then clearly state what you want them to do, reverse their decision. So what happens if you followed all the steps, you've appealed internally, and you're still just getting nowhere? Well, that's when it's time to start thinking about calling in some professional backup. Now we've got to talk about a really key legal concept. It's called bad faith. You see, insurance companies have a legal duty to handle your claim fairly. If they deny it without doing a proper investigation, like, say, they never even sent an adjuster out to look at the damage, or if they can't point to a specific exclusion in your policy to justify the denial, their actions might be considered bad faith. And if that's the case, it gives you some powerful legal leverage. When you do need that backup, you generally have two main options. A public adjuster, they work for you, not the insurance company. They are experts at assessing damage and negotiating a fair value. They're your best bet for disputes over the amount of the loss. An insurance attorney, on the other hand, is for when you believe the denial was just flat out wrong, or when you suspect bad faith is involved. They bring the legal muscle to the fight. Okay, we've spent a lot of time on how to react to a denial. Let's shift gears a little and move to a much more empowering topic: how to make sure you never have to deal with this mess again. It's time to go from being reactive to proactive. Honestly, the best way to win a claim denial is to prevent it from ever happening in the first place. And it really comes down to 3 powerful habits. First, review your policy every single year. Don't just let it auto-renew without looking at it. Second, create and maintain a detailed inventory of everything you own. And third, actively understand what your policy doesn't cover so you can take steps to fill those gaps. Here is a game-changing tip for your home inventory. Forget about messy spreadsheets. Just pull out your phone and hit record. Do a slow video walkthrough of your apartment and just talk about what you're seeing. This is my 65-inch TV. I bought it last May. Open up the closets, open the drawers. Then upload that video and photos of major receipts to the cloud. Now, your proof of ownership is safe from the very disaster you're insured against. It's brilliant. You see, this all comes down to being an active manager of your policy, not just a passive customer. Go online and check the public FEMA flood maps to see if you're in a high-risk zone. Ask your agent about adding a sewer backup endorsement. It's usually cheap and protects you from a very common and very gross exclusion. And for those high-value items, like that engagement ring we talked about, get them appraised and scheduled on your policy for their full value. If you take away just one thing from all of this, let it be this. A denial feels like a slammed door in your face, but it's really just a challenge. By being methodical, by gathering your evidence, and by advocating for yourself, you can often push that door right back open. And that brings us to our final thought. Do you see your insurance policy as just a safety net you set and forget, or is it an active partnership? Because to be truly protected, it absolutely has to be the latter. When you understand your policy, document your property, and are prepared to advocate for yourself, you're not just a customer anymore. You're a partner, making sure that the promise you paid for is a promise that's actually kept.